welcome this afternoon, folks. I'm Ken Wisian, as mentioned, at the University of Texas at Austin, the Bureau of Economic Geology. I am a geothermal geophysicist. It's been my specialty for 30 years since I did my Ph.D. work. So it has been my main area. And right now it is easily, by orders of magnitude, the most exciting time in geothermal I've seen in my 30 years in the business. Today, I'm thrilled to be moderating this panel on the Department of Defense in geothermal, because that bridges my two worlds. I'm also a retired Major General from the Air Force with 30 years going back and forth between science and the military. Why are we here today? We're here because geothermal solves a critical mission need for the military in providing unbreakable power. And this year, as you'll hear shortly from our panelists, the military has jumped in big into geothermal power. So we're going to have each of the panelists introduce themselves, tell a little bit about their organization. By the way, if we get into jargon today, I'll try to be watching that, but just flag me down immediately if we get into jargon and need to explain a term. So we'll go around, we'll introduce, I'll have some questions. I'll be sure and reserve some time for Q&A from the audience. So be thinking of good ones. We don't want all softballs today. And then we'll give closing statements at the end. And we do have one person remote. As you know, we almost had a federal shutdown recently, and that caused quite a bit of scramble, I'm sure, for our DOE people this morning, as well as our DOD folks this afternoon. And one organization just wasn't quite able to do a 180 that quick. So we've got Michael Jones here from the Army on video. And with that, Michael, let me go ahead and have you introduce yourself, your organization, and tell us why you're interested or excited about geothermal.
Sure, of course, thank you. My name is Michael Jones. I'm a project director with the Army Office of Energy Initiatives. Our office's specialty is focusing on land out grants from installations in order to develop renewable energy projects. Our portfolio up to this point has largely focused on solar and energy storage, along with firm generation assets. So think natural gas to firm up those solar assets. And a lot of times, these projects are mainly grid facing, and in kind consideration payment or rent for these out grants, that usually in the form of leases, that the developer is able to provide us resilience in the event that the grid goes dark. So we shoot for on-site energy generation and the ability to tap into that energy generation during a contingency. My background was also at UT Austin. I got my master's degree from there in the Energy and Earth Resources Department, which is technically a School of Geology program, but was very multidisciplinary, brought in geologists, engineers, environmental engineers, public policy, and into one master's program. And since then, I've been a lifelong federal employee, serving stints at the Pipeline and Hazardous Materials Safety Administration, as well as various Corps of Engineers positions, taking me from levee construction, levee rehab, environmental remediation, and then finally here at sort of the military program side for energy. So happy to be here, and thank you very much.
Thank you. Apollo.
Greetings all, Mike Lovell, I go by Apollo. It's a pleasure to be with you. Jamie, thanks for putting on this forum today. I wear a few different hats. Today I'm representing the Joint Base San Antonio on behalf of Brigadier General Russell Driggers. We're the largest joint base in DOD, over 80,000 employees, 11 different installations in and around San Antonio. And I have the pleasure on behalf of JBSA of leading something called the Electromagnetic Defense Initiative. It's a resiliency initiative. It's a task force that has about 710 volunteers throughout the community and over 100 organizations supporting going after resiliency against electromagnetic pulses. Many in the audience may be familiar with it. For those that aren't, electromagnetic pulses can occur naturally through geomagnetic disturbances, and they can also occur through man-made events. We're looking at it from a long-term build-out of how do you create a resilient base, a resilient environment. Along with one of my colleagues, Ms. Blanche Dubois, she's in the audience. We lead an effort that's got a portfolio that includes geothermal, and just recently, in the past week, we jumped into it in a large way with some of our colleagues that are up here today. The Secretary of the Air Force Office of Energy Assurance sponsored a prototyping project at Joint Base San Antonio in the geothermal spaces, wherever is going to partner with us over the next few years, and we're going after it in a big way. So that's the hat I'm wearing today. In addition, I wear a hat for the Texas National Guard. I'm an Air National Guard Brigadier General, and I also am finishing up a 3-year tour at STRATCOM as we speak. So it's a pleasure to be with you. I look forward to this engagement.
Riddler.
All right, yep. Colonel Martin Salinas, go by Riddler. I was a former.
Click.
Well, hear me now?
Yes.
Okay, yep. So call sign Riddler, Colonel Martin Salinas, former B-52 aviator, kind of a generalist. Made my way into the organization I'm in right now, which is called AFWERX. It's not an acronym, it just kind of stands for Air Force Works. We are an innovation organization within the Air Force, seated within the Air Force Research Laboratory. And really, we're a commercialization organization. We go out and look for some of those leading edge capabilities that exist out in the commercial field, and almost like tech scouts, and look out there and see what can we potentially bring in that's game changing, that we can try to operationalize really rapidly into our force to give us that edge. It's an organization that started up in around the 2018 timeframe to get more innovative, to get more fast paced. And again, just to look for those capabilities that keep us at the forefront of leadership and technology. From an energy perspective, that's very near and dear to our heart. It's interesting on a lot of reasons. One, there's a lot of great work being done in the commercial space, obviously even on geothermal right now. We believe it can bring in some great advantages, both I think inside of the United States within our CONUS bases, but even maybe some potential overseas, and we can get into that as we go, but very excited. One of the things that we do, and the reason why we're involved in these discussions is for the entire Department of the Air Force, we manage small business innovation and research funds, again, for the entire department. That's about $1.3 billion annually that we execute into small businesses' hands. We do look across a broad spectrum of working with non-traditional partners and our traditional defense partners also, but again, to push those capabilities forward. You just saw Sage was on the stage prior to us. We were a partner with them and giving them some phase 2 SBIR dollars, the Small Business Innovation and Research Funds, earlier. We spoke with her even last year on a panel that we were on. So really excited to be here, excited about these new technologies and ways to bring energy resilience into our department.
Chris.
Hi, my name is Chris Murray. My call sign is Chris. I'm the non-military guy. I used to be the Enviro, but I'm here representing the U.S. Air Force. Some of you may be curious about why you would want to work with the Air Force on geothermal. And I want to give you 3 reasons that you need to write down. The first is energy resilience. And I can't remember the other 2. It's all about energy resilience. Why is it about energy resilience? Because we have critical missions that span the globe. And if there's an outage anywhere in the globe, that mission might fail. We also have extreme weather that we all know. We have determined adversaries who want to attack our grid, climate change issues, which you've heard about today. And the military, despite it being the protector for our national defense, is 99% resilient on the commercial grid. Wouldn't it be great if we wouldn't have to rely on other people's energy in order to do our mission? So for those who do know DoD, you might say, why the heck would I want to work with you? You're a bureaucracy. You move at a commercial space, at a non-commercial pace, which is true. However, we've figured out ways around that. About a year and a half ago, 2 years ago, I went on a family vacation to Yellowstone and realized, oh my gosh, geothermal, who knew? I know all you guys in the room knew that. I did not. I realized there was opportunity there. I also realized in order to get the small business innovators, those who weren't, or even the big innovators who were not used to working with us or wanted to work with us, we had to have a new way of doing business. So the way we figured out how to do business quickly is we used a contract vehicle that has impacted everyone in this room. You know this intimately, but you might not have heard of it. For instance, to get the man on the moon, we use this contract vehicle. To create the unmanned aerial vehicles, which people now call drones, which change the shape of so many things, the same contract vehicle. For those who got a COVID vaccine, put aside what you think about COVID vaccines, it was the largest distribution and manufacturing of a vaccine in world history, and it wasn't protested. Imagine if it was protested because of a federal acquisition regulation. We might not have seen that for years. That contract vehicles other transaction authorities. That allows us to work quickly with innovators to try to get the innovation that you have to help solve our problems, in this case, energy resilience. So, and to put the test to this, about a year ago is when we announced at another conference, we're going big. A year later, I can sit here and tell you we have 2 firms on contract. So we did move at record speed. And we're not done yet. And those are contracts, and Apollo over here mentioned Ever for Joint Base San Antonio. The other one is Zanskar at Mountain Home. Some of you may wonder why we chose those firms, and you might question it, or you might say, hey, I want another crack at it. Let me just say that we have an amazing risk appetite, at least for the Air Force. Why do we have such a huge risk appetite? Because the military is the largest user of energy in the world. We also have one of the largest land holdings in the world. So we're able to leverage our real estate portfolio to try to meet our crushing need for energy resilience. So that is why we're willing to do projects and get the data to try to move the conversation forward, because we need stuff that's game changing. Yes, it's 24/7. Yes, if it's on our site, on our real estate, it's behind the meter and it's protectable behind a fence. Yes, it's underneath the ground, so it can't be bombed as easily. Yes, it's scalable under the ground, but what we're looking for is the game-changing solutions. And we think this might be it. It remains today one of the top energy priorities, energy innovation priorities of the Air Force. So we're still open for business. As the director of my office, Mr. Kirk Phillips said, our pursuit of energy resilience is unyielding. And so if you still want to work with us, please feel free to contact me, or better yet, contact callsign Apollo, because he might have the good email address and fund it through him. But I'll be here just for a little bit before I leave, but want to work with you, want to keep working with you, and we hope to be able to announce more solicitations in the near future for folks to be able to go after. This is just round 1. Thank you.
Let me clarify or add a little bit to that too. These funding mechanisms really do work. I was also part of the SAGE project, the university it was funded by AFWERX to assess and design a power plant for Ellington Field on the south side of Houston, inside the Houston city limits. So a very successful project through 2 phases on that. You can ask any of us or SAGE how it worked out to work with these other transactional authorities, is that OTA? You've heard of AFWERX. There's another significant organization called Defense Innovation Unit, or DIU, that works along similar lines. Ask any of us about those as you see fit. So let's get into some, drill down a little, pun intended, drill down a little bit further into what y'all see as the main advantages and if any disadvantages of geothermal for the military. And let me start off again with the Army perspective.
Sure, yeah, happy to. So the biggest upside for geothermal, I think Chris mentioned that the 24/7 aspect is obviously the highest motivator here, but the fact that it's firm generation that can unlock other renewables like solar, and it plugs in so well to microgrids that we now have an initiative by, I think it's by 2035, all Army installations are to have functioning microgrids that can allow us to be islandable from the grid. And I can't think of a better like anchor asset than a geothermal power plant that can assist with black start capabilities for the rest of the installation's power assets, as well as just provide that steady state base load energy for not only the installation during contingency, but for the rest of the community surrounding the installation as we kind of continue our effort to green the grid. And that's where the OEI model of provide an out grant, have a grid facing asset 99.999% of the time, and then be able to, during a contingency operation, bring it back in and point it back towards us. So definitely the ability to plug and play with our microgrid initiative is really why we are focusing on geothermal right now, where we think it is best suitable.
Let me just toss it out to the panel for anyone to jump in. Chris.
You heard, again, 24/7, but disadvantage. This might come a shocker to you, but in the energy space, in the military, we don't have a lot of money. Right? The money goes to weapon systems. It doesn't go to projects such as ours. So we are largely dependent on third-party financing. Congress has given us multiple authorities to rely on other people's money to help us do stuff. Why is that important to understand? Because we don't want to own, operate, maintain those facilities. We want to just buy those resilient electrons. While we've heard all today that money is important, how we can mitigate that disadvantage, the lack of it, is we, as I mentioned, have a crushing need. We could be your early phase partners to work with. We have a massive amount of real estate. So we want you to help us identify the next good places to go. And the most importantly, I think this is importantly, but I'm not a finance guy, we have long-term statutory authorities to do power purchase agreements. We have up to 30 years in one vehicle. We could do up to 50 or 60 years in another vehicle. So if you're looking for someone who has a great credit rating, who wants to be an offtake for a ridiculously long amount of time, and who wants to be your early stage partner on innovation, that's how we can mitigate how we don't have money.
I think from an operational perspective, my answer would be options, right? Resilience is options and survivability. And when I think about where we're going, even with the electrification in some ways of a lot of the capability that we have, one of the ways I entered in my kind of my origin story into AFWERX was I was in the operational test community. And what AFWERX was looking at in about 2020 timeframe, when they were kind of kicking into a different stage, they were looking at the electrification of aviation. And the whole point of that was resiliency, options, and survivability in case, as we could imagine, perhaps, and right now, if you go to a forward operating base, and our Army brethren will understand this, you're going to hear a certain noise, and that's the noise of generators going 24/7, right? And those are diesel-powered generators that are going. Now you imagine a world where we're electrifying a lot of our capability, which we are likely to do, and there's a lot of, we can get into the conversations about energy density and that sort of thing of batteries, but there's a lot of interesting things happening out there. Well, that's a humongous drain on a very small power grid that would exist even on a forward base somewhere. Now, I think an interesting conversation to have too is, what are those options, right? Is it a small nuclear reactor? Is it a geothermal capability that's maybe relatively easy or so, and easy is a weird word, to install? Because one of the things you think about is, for example, go back to options. If I use a small portable reactor, it's not 100% portable, right? Once we put it in place, it's going to maybe be there for a while. Can I leave it behind, right? That's a bigger consideration than if I were to put in a geothermal power source. The consideration of leaving that behind, perhaps, it's a little bit of a different conversation.
Ken, there's been a few different topics in being in Texas, and this being a Texas day for Pivot. I think it's important to go back to where the game-changing part of this environment occurred. And I would argue with you to consider Winter Storm Uri as that game changer for us. Some of our prior panelists have talked about that in relation to the policy aspect, but the practicality of it. It's easy to talk about resilient sources of power and the effects of losing those green energy sources that are dependent on wind and sun. But beyond the 24/7, having a predictable, clean source of producing clean electricity, not just electricity, but clean electricity. When the military is looking for resilient energy, we're not only looking for the ability to power offices, but we're looking at powering sophisticated electronics. And when you turn power on and off to those electronics, that hammers them, takes cycles off of them, the predictability and the ability for that resource to produce its intended output with a global effect. It's got a low tolerance for that, for failure. And when you throttle or hammer that device, you really take the life away from that device. So I wanted to add that as an aspect of resiliency to consider. And when you bring a baseload source like the potential for geothermal and the dispatchability to make up for when you lose other sources of power, that's important. Another aspect that hasn't been talked about a whole lot today, it's been mentioned a little bit, and that's the actual footprint it takes on a base. At the surface level, it's relatively small, and being part of the Air Force, we're always concerned about what's above the surface. We fly a lot of stuff, and you don't want things in the way of fast movers. But we've got plenty of expandable space below the surface. So the site that we've chosen at Joint Base San Antonio, going through other transaction authorities or using OTAs, we've got the ability as we prototype this to expand as much subsurface as we need. And that gives us the ability to scale it and grow it based on whatever the success of that prototype is. But I would propose that the ability to keep much of the infrastructure underground has a great premium to it as well.
I'll just add, as a former base commander, the fact that there's no logistics tail is a big deal to the military too. Your supply line runs straight down, and that's a big factor. And the fact that it's inside your fence line so you can guard it and protect it is significant also. Now, as was alluded to earlier, the Defense Department, led by the Air Force Office of Energy Assurance, earlier this year announced what I believe is the biggest single call for new geothermal power plants in history, 6 power plants at bases around the country. The contracts are now let for both Air Force and I think both Army installations. The Navy, I'm not too sure about. But the military, as the ideal early adopter of prototype level technology that understands risk, is a big deal in my head. What I'm interested in hearing from the panelists now, if one or all of these prototype plants work out, what do you see as the scale up potential for geothermal in military applications? Anyone can jump in.
I'll jump on it, Ken. From the perspective of where's the top end of this go? The neat part about using other transaction authorities and the vehicle that the prototype has been put on is it allows it to scale, and it's going to be really more of a performance base. So at Joint Base San Antonio, we use a lot of energy for 80,000 employees and the different capabilities we produce, but the same contract vehicle can scale it to other locations. So not to sound hokey, but there's not a top end for it. If you look at, if it's successful at Joint Base San Antonio, which is a little bit outside of the heat gradient that was shown on the map at the opening part of the day for Texas, we're close to the heat gradient. And depending on which models you look at, we're 150, 160 degrees Celsius perhaps at depth. But if we're able to prove that it's viable there, we can put it on any US North America base. And that's what we really are looking for, the ability to have that resilient energy regardless of location.
Yeah, and I think, as I was insinuating before, I think once you start to prove it out, CONUS, once you start to get those muscle movements in, you understand it. I think an expeditionary thought of how it's used, I think it's going to definitely occur to folks. Like, now, how do you make this smaller, portable, quicker? with closed loop systems. You and I were speaking about that. Maybe even a call out to industry, like, how do I operationalize this and move it in an expeditionary manner? I think those conversations are going to start to be had pretty rapidly.
Michael, jump in.
So from the conventional side here, if we're not under the assumption of the geothermal anywhere model, which I'm super excited that the Air Force is jumping into that model to see how that actually plays out in real life. The way the Army is approaching it, we're taking a much more standardized approach through the phase 1 exploration, phase 2 exploratory drilling, and in that context, I'd at least like to start naming some names of specific installations that I think we could broaden out through at least that model, right, where we have that conventional hydrothermal resource. So you mentioned our 2 projects. We have Fort Wainwright in Fairbanks, Alaska, and Fort Irwin in the Mojave Desert in California. Now, Fort Wainwright is a little tricky as we don't really know what the resource is there like whatsoever. Fort Irwin, we do have some pretty good indications, especially considering the Navy's COSO geothermal power plant is just right there up the road, the government's only geothermal power plant. Other installations that we are really looking at include Hawthorne Army Depot in Nevada, and please do watch this space closely here in the next month. We are working with the DOE to try to set something up, potentially through the same other transaction authority at Hawthorne Army Depot. Just a little teaser there. Other installations that we've heard either from industry directly or through our friends at the Navy Geothermal Programs Office who have it on their short list is Fort Bliss and White Sands Missile Range, both on the Texas and New Mexico border around El Paso. Tooele Army Depot in Utah, and Sierra Army Depot in California. So those are installations that we think we could, today with the high TRL technology readiness level tech that exists in the industry currently, we could go out and explore if there are willing industry partners to help us out. As Chris said, we don't have weapon systems and we don't have money. And those are very closely correlated in DoD. And so we do need that third party partner to help us out in pursuing development here. Thanks.
I'll add one thing that has already been touched upon while CONUS is a focus. Operational energy. Operational energy does have the money. They have a lot of money. So if you're able to figure out how to think about geothermal drilling quickly to do an operation overseas, wow, that changes everything, because that's where we could really be partners. But institutionally, I think it's proving out here first in the continental United States. It's just easier administratively. If you prove it out here, then the whole world opens up.
I think one thing to tag on to that too, I think one of the things that we can do from an AFWERX perspective is, we have research and development dollars, right? So if you have ideas out there, if there are companies that are starting to explore that area, we all the way down to a white paper idea up to an actual prototype, we're looking to fund those things. We have, not to give a big plug for organization, but we have part of that 1.3 billion portfolio that I mentioned, 40% of that is what we call open topic. And that means as long as you have a good solid commercialization strategy, you can show that it has a dual utility, which most civil engineering things are completely dual use for the government in most cases. And it's a sound technology. There's likelihood that you can get some seed money from our organization to kind of pursue the advancement of that technology also. And as brought up by the Army, unfortunately not with us today is the Navy on this, but they have been running a geothermal field for decades. They have a small, excellent, but severely under-resourced Navy program office on geothermal. So keep that in mind too. We're almost up to Q&A, but I want to ask another question because we have multinationals in here today. Are there any limits or restrictions on foreign entities, multinationals, citizenship standards on participating with the military on developing geothermal energy?
I think I could potentially hop in there. I don't want to get too specific, but we did initially think we had an obstacle along those lines of foreign national, and while it wasn't a foreign company, it was a domestic company headquartered here. That really was never. Once I brought it up to our Office of General Counsel, they said, "Yeah, this is great. This is just fine." So I'm not going to speak for DoD on this, but just as for the one example that we have, we didn't see any trouble with it.
And I would also, one thing that I've heard throughout Pivot, not only today, but earlier in the week, was data is important. And how do we get collaboration in this space? Much of what we've learned about geothermal thus far is through our allies. We need to keep that conversation open, and the more we can collaborate, the faster we can accelerate this technology and bring this ability in. So we want to collaborate. There are certain gates that, because of acquisition, we're going to be careful about. But when it comes to collaboration, especially with our allies, it's definitely an enabler.
Any others?
I couldn't say it better than General Lovell. That was a good point. I agree. I think partnership with our allies is hugely important. From an AFWERX funding perspective, that somebody may ask me afterwards. We do typically only work with American-based companies. The biggest thing we look for, though, generally, is to make sure there's no adversarial funding involved with those companies. But other than that, we're pretty well open.
If you're friends, let's play. If you're not, then we won't.
That's a good summary. Okay, I hope you thought of some real tough ones to throw at the panel here. I'm going to open it up for questions. I see a first one down here in front, right there.
Hey, Tim Allison with Southwest Research Institute. I've talked to a lot of utilities who are generally very risk averse when adopting new technologies. You guys have talked about being a little bit less risk averse as a good first client, but you still have selection criteria for what you'll choose or how you evaluate technologies for your demos. So my question is, can you talk a little bit about what's important to you for evaluating technologies for their readiness for a demo on an installation?
He's asking us for a down selection criteria.
I don't know if we can do
that. If you got a good idea, if you got a good team, if you got some financial backing, those are, obvious answers to your question, which isn't revealing anything procurement sensitive. The other part of your question, I just want to pick at utilities. In our projects, we have been working closely with the utilities and letting them know what we're doing. And as you know, utilities are the exact opposite of us. Absolutely not risk averse. If you ask them on a scale from 0 to 10, 10 being most risk averse, they will usually say 0. So they are more than happy to have us prototype something, have something demonstrated on our base. But if it's figured out and proven, they want to build transfer. They want to be a partner in that. And as soon as they become a partner in it, then it becomes rate-based. And for those who aren't in the utility world, that's when all the ratepayers pay for a tiny portion of that project, which is then no longer us having to fund it, the military. It's all the energy customers in that service territory funding it. And that then becomes a financial model that helps make something sustainable. So we want to work with good people. We will be the first movers. And if you can prove stuff out, the world is your oyster in terms of getting the utilities on board, even those who have zero risk tolerance.
So this is where the Army is very similar to the utilities in the way we're approaching this. We're pretty risk averse, at least currently in this current DIU exercise, and trying not to get too specific on criteria, but to describe the installations that are currently in our portfolio that we think we can develop at. They are basically greenfield sites. They don't have any exploration done whatsoever. So having a company that has a defined, rigorous exploration methodology is certainly made us feel better when we were doing selections. That may change, though, as our risk appetite increases. if everything goes well, maybe we do start looking at the brand new low TRL tech, but that's not quite where we're at the moment, at least from the Army side. Like I said, Army, Navy, Air Force are all taking kind of our own diversified approach at this, and I think that's really important in this current effort to really attack this from all sides.
Anything else from the panel on that one? Go ahead.
One other thing about the utilities. I've talked to a couple different utilities and kind of a little brash said, who's your biggest energy user? It's Air Force, right? And they said, no, it's not. It's data farms. And data farms have a sustainability mandate. And they see the future of how that's just growing. So another reason why you want to work with us to prove it out, to then get at the utilities, because they have a crushing need too.
And from my own experience talking to utilities, the light bulb is starting to come on that no matter how much wind and solar you buy, you can't decommission any old plants. Whereas with baseload geothermal, that at least becomes an option. So that light bulb's starting to come on utilities too.
Robert Estes, retired from Halliburton. Michael, you were talking about high TRL, feeling confident about doing a project, going ahead with an installation. On the other hand, looking at low TRLs, new developments, new research, one of the problems we oil field companies always have is getting to a field test, getting actual equipment downhole to test. And of course, with geothermal, that implies that we're going to have a location, a place, an installation, clearances, regulatory, et cetera. To what extent can Army bases or Air Force bases be those proving grounds for field tests for new downhole high-tech development?
I think there's a huge potential to help you guys pilot this new technology. We just haven't heard anything directly from industry. So I invite you guys to, I don't know how you could, contact me after this, but yeah, let's talk. And especially now, striking while the iron's hot. I have lots of very important people with lots of very important acronyms in my inbox asking about other installations that we can do this at. So while we have their attention, let's see what else we can do. I know this DIU-led effort is, closed, or at least close to the folks who are currently in it. But if we get enough industry interest at, OEI at our office, and we can report that industry interest back up through our chain of command at the Pentagon, maybe that shakes up what's available to us. So we're really at the mercy of industry to bring the good ideas to us.
Taylor, we got a question over here, so we'll go first.
I think we have some follow-ups first on.
Oh, sure, go.
So in addition to the question you bring up, Robert, I think there's other aspects too that hit into the sweet spot of what you're talking about. When you start talking geothermal, and some of the people were using AGS and EGS to talk about, the next gen of geothermal, I think there are other aspects when you really get to the production side. When I think of super CO2 and how that's come forward, when I think about micro-sizing turbines, when you start thinking about these other capabilities that are going to take spots that traditionally were not perhaps warm enough to produce, add to it insulated couplings and things of that regard, it's going to drop that temperature or raise that temperature gradient variance to where it will become adaptable in any location. So someone may have an idea that's TR2, TR 1.5 right now, but if it affects the overall output later, we have to look at it holistically. And that's where I would encourage those that are in that R&D space now to bring your ideas forward. We're interested in all of them.
And I'll put in a plug for AFWERX, having received some of their funding for these intermediate levels of technology development. The bar for applying is pretty low. It's as low as a slide deck for up to phase 1 and phase 2, which comes out to a little under $1 million to move things along on the commercialization path. So get on DIU's, get on AFWERX's distro list.
And just one addition. Oh, sorry.
Go, Mike.
Thank you. Yeah, I was just going to say one additional point I'd like to make to kind of give some context behind our attitude towards risk at this point. Speaking as somebody who's extremely excited over what geothermal can do for the Army and just generally the technology and just being interested in it. We need this to go well initially, because if it doesn't, it's going to get buried as something that just doesn't work by people who don't really understand the technical ramifications of what we're doing. And so if we jump into something with that low TRL, even though it's we learn something from it and it's technically a failure, that all the Army folks are going to see is failure. So we do kind of need to build a rapport with the folks in the Pentagon who aren't energy savvy or geothermal savvy. But once we do have these successes, hopefully here through this DIU process and continuing forward, then maybe that risk appetite grows.
I got a slightly different add-on to that too, and I think this some of the privilege that we have at AFWERX is we can take more shots on goal, versus some of the other organizations cannot, right? So we tend to be a little less risk averse because we're just seeding dual use capability, right? So we can take those shots on goal. We can have a lot of them fail on our watch, which we don't want them to, but you have to explore that maybe we're missing something. So we have the capacity and we do it. And I think from a partnership, and I get this question a lot. I'm actually out at Austin, not too far from here, where even the Army Applications Lab and Army Futures Command and our DIU partners, Defense Innovation Units, they work for the Office of Secretary of Defense. They're out there also. We all talk to each other. You wouldn't think so, but we do. We collaborate quite well and share ideas and companies. And one of the things we do, we talk to also our larger partners, larger commercial partners out there, not just small companies. And I think one of the opportunities for a company like Halliburton to participate is we're open source. We'll show you all of our companies we're investing in, and I think you can shop from it as perhaps a market of capability that's already being seeded. Dollars or whatever, or if you just are interested in those companies, they're there. We're happy to share.
Also, just for the audience, if you're interested in connecting with any of the panelists, just Taylor, we can make the connection. A lot of deep expertise in the subsurface on this panel. They're modest. Ken Wisian is a geophysicist and was studied at SMU, geothermal. And Mike in 2017 even, oh my God. His master's thesis out of UT is what got me excited about geothermal in Texas. Time for one more question for you all.
So I was today years old when I learned that the military was super interested in geothermal. And then I'm still trying to explore that idea of okay, remote operations, mobile units and stuff like that for a power source. And I can't help but comparing it with nuclear. I'm thinking nuclear subs, and I'd be curious if you guys could give your perception or just ranking of comparing geothermal to nuclear, or even, diesel generators as something that's, suitable for remote and mobile power sources.
I think the Navy's proven it out, right? So we're talking to the Navy quite often. There is an active effort right now with the DoD to get after the small modular reactors. I think there's one going up in Eielson, so which is not too far from Fairbanks, which is getting. I grew up at that area, so up at Eielson Air Force Base, which is again down the street from Fairbanks, where Fort Wainwright is. They're putting in a small modular reactor. There's a lot of discussion. I don't want to get too far ahead of the energy experts here about the sustainability, the real the capacity to put something like that out there. The technology's there. There's no doubt. I think it's more of how do you do it? How do you keep it secure? Because once you put it in place from an expeditionary perspective, it's not just, hey, now we're done, pack it up and let's take it home, right? So there's a lot more to consider there. But the studies are happening and the discussions are happening across the different services in a collaborative manner. I couldn't give you a rank order, though.
Air Force Office of Energy Assurance, Mr. Kirk Phillips, who directs that, nuclear #1. geothermal number 2. But in terms of moving out on projects, geothermal number 1, right? It's easier to do. It remains an interest of ours. I've also been asked to note naturally occurring hydrogen is also an interest of ours, which is there's some studies that suggest that our Air Force bases sit right on top of those potential resources. So we're interested in anything. Going back to my quiz, top 3 points, if it provides energy resilience, we're interested. Nuclear is just a little harder to prove out from a demonstration standpoint, given all the other issues associated with it that geothermal doesn't have.
I think ditto on Chris here. I think the Army sees more upside with nuclear than geothermal, and that's illustrated by the fact that if you Google Project Pele, that is an actual real life small modular reactor, operational energy forward operating base, pilot that the Army is involved with, and we don't have a cool project name for geothermal yet. So if y'all have any ideas, let me know. I'd like to kind of get some cool Project Pele type heat involved with our initiative here.
Being retired, I can speak pretty freely, and having been a base commander, I like small modular reactors too, but if you put one of those on your base, that's now the #1 target on your base.
Ken, back to you to wrap.
Closing comments. Let's go off location first.
I can't remember who said it, but just the fact that we have a DoD panel here talking about geothermal is absolutely amazing and gets me incredibly excited for what we can do with the industry and across the government in general. We do have some kinks to work out internal in the government. A lot of that is the same barriers that the industry has in terms of permitting and land use from BLM and state regulatory authorities. Just know that we are currently working through that with these projects, and hopefully by the time we get to the rest of the industry, we'll have everything all worked out, and we'll be able to really move quickly on these concepts. So I look forward to working with all of you guys in the room here really soon. Thank you.
Thank you. Apollo.
It's an exciting time when I've listened to some of the earlier panelists. I think Jamie may have even described it at one point of perhaps this industry feels like it's almost in that valley of death, waiting to transition from a DoD warfighter perspective and needing resilient energy to do the missions that we're tasked to do. We don't see it as a valley of death. We see you getting pulled right on up, and we're wanting the people in this room to make it possible. We need it to be possible, and we want it to be a win.
Yeah, that's completely accurate. You've heard us say words like options and resilience, and I'll be as bold as to say I think it's a national security imperative that we that's why all of us are here. That's how important these sort of options are.
Thank you for all listening. Jamie, thank you for inviting me. And the Air Force, simply, we're open for business. Come see us.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, guys.